Hey everybody, real quick before this video starts, as I recorded the voiceover for this, I realized I wrote something wrong in my script very consistently, and I could never figure out what it was, but I knew something didn't sound right, and now that I'm editing this video, I've realized that this game is not called Cyberpunk 77, it's called Cyberpunk 2077, so excuse the entire time I say Cyberpunk 77. I wanted to play Cyberpunk 77 for the same reason so many others did. It was being developed by the same people who did the incredibly successful and still popular game The Witcher 3, along with the incredible cinematics that were release dated all the way back in 2013. The hype for Cyberpunk was unreal. Think Elden Ring, but for almost 10 years. I was just 15 when I heard about this game for the first time, and I've only recently played it and beat it a decade later. Now with the somewhat recent announcement of The Witcher 4, it's a sad reality for so many gamers like myself who waited so long for this game only to see the writing on the wall that 2 years post-release, Cyberpunk 77 could be described in one word, and that would be disappointing. You play as V, but before you set foot in the cyberpunk world, you get to pick one of 3 life paths. This is the fancy way of saying backstory for your character. The 3 options are a corporal, which is just kind of like a corporate pencil pusher type employee, a goody guy, a nomad, which is think Mad Max, outskirts of the city, crazy wild people, or a street kid, which is exactly what it sounds like. You grew up on the streets of Night City. Outside of a different starting point, as well as the prologue being a little bit different, it doesn't change much. However, you do get some different dialogue options throughout the game depending upon which life path you choose. For me, I decided to pick the corporal life path because I'm an American and I like the idea of being a member of a corrupt corporation. So after you've decided which backstory you want for your character, you get to play the game, and right away your boss tells you that, hey, you have to go end the life of somebody, and you're like, all right, that's simply what I do here, I'll gladly do it, but I need the help of my friend Jackie. So you contact Jackie, and Jackie's like, we must do the same thing we do every time before we end someone else's life, and that is go to a bar and get drinks. So you go to a bar, and out of nowhere these like big monstrous guys show up, and they're like, we need your information, and you're like, no, and they're like, okay, well, we'll just take it from you. So they put these little wires on you and they take all the information from you, including the information that your boss gave you about the hit that you had to do. So you and Jackie are just like, you know what? Screw it. Let's just not work for this corporation anymore. Let's not do this hit. We're done. We're gonna go live a life of petty crime. And that's exactly what you do. So insert montage. After the montage, you do one mission, which is just kind of like a hands-on tutorial. But after that, Jackie tells you that Dexter Deshawn wants you guys to do a job for him. It's going to pay you more money. It's going to bring you to the big leagues in the eyes of the petty crime. However, before you do this job, Dexter wants to meet you. So you go meet him, and it's the whole big mob boss thing. You know, big cigar, back of the limo, big burly man. And he tells you that he wants you to do this job. But before you do the job, you have to go meet someone else, and that person is Evelyn Parker. So you go and you meet her, things go well, you do a couple short missions to set everything up, and then it's showtime. Now everything you've done up until this point has been in preparation for one big job, and that big job is you need to sneak into a hotel room and steal this sort of software chip thingy, and you need to get that information back to Dex, who then gets it back to Evelyn so you guys can get paid. However, things don't go according to plan, and the guy you're stealing from is the heir to this big company. And when you show up, of course the CEO shows up, this guy's father, and you see the son put his hands around the father's neck, and yeah, he squeezes it till the father stops breathing anymore. So then the guy calls security and he's like, ignore the hand marks on my father, he clearly was poisoned, so be on the lookout. So now you and Jackie are wanted men having to sneak out of the hotel, and you do successfully. Unfortunately, you damage the case that the chip was in, and when you call Evelyn, she's like, yeah, yeah, you need to just put it in your brain. And Jackie's like, oh, okay, I'll do that. So once he does that, you guys limp your way out of the hotel, get into your car, but Jackie's been shot and Jackie dies. But before Jackie dies, he takes out the chip that was in his brain and gives it to you so you can keep it safe, so you can at least complete the mission and get paid. So you say your final goodbye to Jackie and you head over to Dexter's to give him the chip so you can at least finish the job. But when you get there, Dex is freaking out because he says you've caused too much attention and you guys have to leave the city. But he says before you leave to go clean yourself up. And this dialogue sounds so out of place, you just know something bad is going to happen. But there's nothing you can do. So you go into the bathroom and you clean off your face, and then you come back out and boom, you get punched and then shot in the head by Dexter. After you get shot by Dexter, the screen goes black, and then a title card plays for Cyberpunk 77 with a brief montage of Night City. After that, you're back into the game, although something doesn't feel right. You don't feel the same as you did before, and things look a little off, and that's because you're not playing as V anymore, you're playing as Johnny Silverhand, voiced by none other than the great Keanu Reeves. And as much as I want to talk about him right now, I'm going to save it for a little bit later where I can talk a little more in depth about him. But one of the things I will say is that every mission that you play as Johnny Silverhand is one of the best missions in the game. All you do is run and gun. It's incredibly fun. You don't have to worry about dying ever. You have an overpowered gun. After the mission as Johnny Silverhand, you do get back to playing V, except you wake up in a landfill and you see Dexter and the bodyguard of the CEO that died. And it's clear that Dexter never wanted to leave the city and he tried to make some sort of deal with the company for giving them you for his freedom. However, right after you're found, the bodyguard just kills Dexter and takes you for some, I'm guessing, wrong conviction murder charge. But out of nowhere, you guys start to get in a shootout with cars and it goes pretty bad. You both get injured and you have to call a doctor. So you call one of the doctors that V knows, and then just like you did 3 minutes ago, you black out. Now this blackout feels like it's a lot longer than the previous one. You really get a sense of how long time is taken for you to recover. But once you finally do, the doctor lets you know that that chip that's inside your brain is the consciousness of Johnny Silverhand. And if you leave it in, it's going to work like a virus on a computer and corrupt your body, and Johnny will take over. And if you take it out, it will override your computer and you'll just die. So the whole premise of the game is to figure out a way to get Johnny Silverhand out of your head before time is up. But we're going to stop talking about the plot right there because we will mention a few things a little bit later. But for the most part, after this, the game really opens up and you can go about completing it however you want. So everybody's experience will most likely be a little bit different. And if you are one of the few people who've never played this game, I don't really want to spoil too much more of the story, although we will talk about spoilers a little bit later. But from now, let's move on to the dislikes. Now, according to the few articles that I looked up in preparation for this video, CD Projekt Red spent upwards of $316 million to make this game. That is a soft estimate, and that accounts for everything prior to the many, many delays this game had. And that is a lot of money. To give you another comparison, Grand Theft Auto 5 only spent an estimated cost $265 million to make. The only point I'm trying to make with this is that more money doesn't equal better game. Now, I have no doubt that there were employees that worked for CD Projekt Red that this was their passion project and they worked really, really hard on. I bet there's employees who would say this is their proudest accomplishment. But if I had to pick one reason why so many people dislike this game, it would be, and I know this sounds crazy, but it would be, I think it was just rushed. And like I said, that is insane to think about when the first revealed trailer came out in 2012. But I think I speak for the majority of gamers when I say waiting longer for a game that includes the things that were promised is so much better than releasing a game in the state that CD Projekt Red released Cyberpunk 77 in. Now, if you go back and look at 2020 reviews or first impressions of this game, there was really a consistent theme with how bad the game handled bugs. There were cars flying everywhere, there were people glitching through walls. It doesn't take much for you to look up a montage of many, many bugs that this had. But in 2022, with one big update that they've done up until now, from my personal experience, I wouldn't say this game was filled with bugs as much as it was just filled with disappointment. I was expecting a lively city filled with the sounds of people walking and talking, flying cars zooming by you, speedy cars driving, whizzing by you, only to get into the city to see maybe a few people walking by you, or to see headlights of cars in the distance only for them to disappear before I even get close to them, and to never see cars flying above me. And those are all things that were promised to you in the over 10 years that we knew about this game. So when I say waiting longer for a game to have what it was promised, those are some of the things that I'm talking about. But on that note, there is nothing that I was more disappointed in than the drive-in in this game. With other reviews out there, a consistent theme that I saw is that a lot of people enjoyed the drive-in in this game. And I'm really not trying to sound contrary or just be the opposite side of what people say, but the drive-in in this game was probably my most disappointing thing. When I look back at my experience on this, I never had to look at the road when I was driving because there was no one else on the road. It was the most dull moments of the game, or when I had to drive somewhere. On the highway, there might have been a few people, but there definitely was not the sound or the look of a big busy city when you were driving on the in-town city streets, no matter the time of day. Now, there's a few things that I want to talk about that could be considered spoilers territory. I don't think they really spoil much. However, if you haven't played this game, these are things that would be enjoyable to experience on your own. So just fast forward to this point if you don't want to hear any spoilers. Earlier, we talked about Jackie and how I said I wish he would have stayed in the game a bit longer. But in that same theme, I want to take a few minutes and talk about some things I think that would have made the story better. And right away, the entire game, I kept thinking how this should have been a classic revenge story against Dexter. You could literally keep everything else the same. Jackie could still die the way he did. You could still go about getting the consciousness the same way. You could still have Johnny Silverhand in the game. Just don't make it as you going against this big company that's corrupt. Make it as just a revenge story for someone who double-crossed you. Another character that was incredibly underused was Evelyn. She helps you throughout the entire prologue. In fact, she's the one you call when the chip case gets damaged, and she says to put it inside your brain to keep it functional. However, after the prologue, she just gets kidnapped and then you rescue her, but she's unconscious, so you bring her back to Jade's house. But a little bit later in the game, you get a phone call and you find out that she just ended her own suffering in the bathtub. Now, if you fast forwarded or you're not keeping score, that's Jackie, Dexter, and Evelyn. All really good characters, all gone before the prologue ends. I don't know if that was done intentionally or if that was just something they overlooked or if they were too fixated on making it a corrupt company revenge story, but I think the game would have been much better if Jackie still died and then you and Evelyn took on Dexter for the rest of the game. Alright, let's talk about the combat and melee system next. Now, this is something that, again, seems like people differ on opinions. Some people really like it, some people don't. I definitely land on the side of there's much to be desired here, with the exception of Johnny Silverhand's gun that you only get during his missions. No gun felt unique. I never found myself thinking, oh, I wish I had a sniper for this scenario, or oh, I wish I had a handgun. The one exception I would say is the shotguns that I use for the majority of the game, and that's only because they have a weird perk to them where they knock the enemy down, so you can just knock them down and then spam it into their temple and it's free kills that way. But I never felt like the guns were good. And the melee system was much the same. I never felt a uniqueness between weapons. I never felt like one weapon was more fun to use. It just kind of felt like a typical melee weapon. Now, if you look up videos, you can see that there are things that improve the melee in the combat system, but I'm talking just overall, not things that change how much damage they output or how fast you can swing a sword. I just mean overall, they never felt like they were fun to use. But the biggest disappointment for me when it comes to the combat is that it is impossible to do anything stealthy in this game. Now, there are multiple instances where in cutscenes you see people get shot in the head and they die immediately. In fact, that happens to you at the end of the prologue. You get kicked and then Dexter shoots you one time and you tell people the rest of the game that that killed you. However, you can never do that. And just like I previously said, there are ways for you to upgrade your guns to make them one shot. There are ways to upgrade your melee to do more damage. Although a lot of this stuff takes place hours after you complete the main quest line. And when there are specifically stealthy missions, I just wish there was a weapon or a knife or something that I could use that was more than just a takedown ability to end someone quietly. I hope I can find this, but there's a moment in the game where I snuck up to someone, I threw a knife at his head, head. It got stuck in his head and he just shot me. Now, like I said, although my game did have bugs, it was definitely filled with more disappointment than bugs. And I hope I've done a decent enough job explaining to you what some of those major disappointments were. Now, you might be getting the feeling by this video up until now that I didn't like this game, and you would be correct. I didn't like this game. However, there were some things that were surprisingly good, and well, not surprisingly good, things that surprised me that were good. And none of it has to do with the gameplay, and almost none of it has to do with this story itself, although it does have to do with the voice actors of the characters and the chemistry that was put together on screen. So one of the things that this game does really well, actually, is the dialogue and the chemistry from character to character is pretty good. Like we talked about earlier, you don't feel like you connect to the main storyline as far as trying to take on this big corrupt company. However, the smaller details, the connections with Jackie, the connections with Evelyn are something that are really special. However, the connection with Pan Am is probably the best thing in this entire game. Another thing this game does well is it does a good job at making you wish Night City was a real place. Like I said earlier, there's majority of the game you're not going to see people, you're not going to see cars, but when you do, it does give you a really nice feeling of wanting to be around there. It does have a good thing going when it's going. Unfortunately, the game just doesn't work most of the time. You'll find yourself driving on empty roads or walking on empty sidewalks, but when they're full, it is truly a great feeling. In conclusion, Cyberpunk 77 was a game that I and so many others were excited for nearly a decade. Unfortunately, it was beyond disappointing. This game has potential. The best thing it has going for it is that you want the world to exist. You want Night City to be a backdrop for some game. The whole time I was playing this, I kept thinking how cool it would be if this game was just a Grand Theft Auto mod. The endless fun and enjoyment you could have with an open world like this, not to mention the RP potential, is endless. And although CD Projekt Red has always said multiplayer is a planned part of this game, unfortunately, I think it's safe to say with the over 30,000 returns, the negative reviews, and endless amounts of videos just like this, Cyberpunk 77 will never have a multiplayer, especially with the announcement of The Witcher 4 and that it's still priced at $59.99 2 years post-launch. It's not going to happen. And lastly, we must rate this incredibly disappointing game. Beyond everything we've discussed today, the only hope I see for this game is that it becomes a No Man's Sky situation, where it being overpromised and released in a really negative state, thanks to good hard work in development teams and management over several years, they've managed to make No Man's Sky a good game. Unfortunately, No Man's Sky always had multiplayer in mind, as to where Cyberpunk 77 doesn't even have a multiplayer function. This game is nothing but disappointing from the developers, from the management, from the release, and we waited over a decade for. It is one of the worst AAA games I have ever played. I would never recommend this to anyone, especially at the full price of $59.99 2 years post-launch. I give Cyberpunk 77 an honest and sad 2 points, making it nothing short of the worst game I've ever played from a AAA studio.